June 15, 1944. Somewhere in the French countryside near Calais, German reconnaissance pilots flew their morning patrols, cameras clicking as they documented what appeared to be the largest Allied invasion force ever assembled. Below them stretched endless rows of Sherman tanks, artillery batteries, supply depots, and landing craft. The pilots returned to base with photographs that would change the course of World War II. But there was one problem. None of it was real. What those German cameras captured were inflatable rubber tanks, wooden artillery pieces, and canvas trucks that could be folded up and carried in a single duffel bag. This was Operation Fortitude, the greatest military deception in human history. But the Americans weren't the only ones playing this deadly game of smoke and mirrors. Thousands of miles to the east, Soviet commanders were perfecting their own brand of battlefield magic, creating entire phantom armies from plywood, paint, and pure imagination. This is the story of how fake weapons won real wars, how cardboard cannons fooled Nazi intelligence, and how the art of military deception reached such extraordinary heights that enemy commanders would abandon perfectly sound strategies, redirect entire army groups, and make catastrophic tactical decisions based on weapons that existed only in their minds. By the end of 1944, both the Americans and Soviets had turned deception into a science so precise that they could manipulate enemy movements from hundreds of miles away, using nothing more than clever stagecraft and psychological warfare. The stakes could not have been higher. Every inflatable tank that convinced a German pilot meant fewer real panzers defending the actual landing zones. Every fake Soviet artillery position that drew Luftwaffe bombers meant more genuine Red Army units surviving to fight another day. This wasn't just about fooling the enemy. This was about rewriting the fundamental mathematics of warfare itself. But how do you create an entire army from scratch? How do you make a single inflatable tank look convincing to trained military observers flying overhead at 300 miles per hour? And most importantly, how do you coordinate these massive deceptions across thousands of square miles without the enemy detecting a single mistake? The answers lie in two of the most audacious military operations ever conceived, separated by thousands of miles, but united by one simple truth. Sometimes the most powerful weapon on the battlefield is the one that doesn't actually exist. Let's start with the Soviets, because their mastery of deception began long before the Americans even entered the war. Operation Bagration in June 1944 would become the Red Army's greatest triumph, smashing Army Group Center and driving the Wehrmacht back 450 miles in just 5 weeks. But the real genius wasn't in the attack itself. It was in making the Germans look in completely the wrong direction. Soviet deception doctrine, known as maskirovka, had been developed over decades of military thinking. The concept was elegantly simple. Make the enemy believe your main attack will come from one direction while you strike from another. But the execution required theatrical precision on an industrial scale. General Alexei Antonov, chief of the Soviet General Staff, understood that the Germans expected the next major offensive to target Army Group South Ukraine near the Romanian oil fields. This made perfect strategic sense. Cut off German access to petroleum, and their war machine would grind to a halt. So Antonov decided to give them exactly what they expected to see. Throughout May 1944, Soviet engineers began constructing what appeared to be massive staging areas south of Kyiv. Reconnaissance flights would reveal tank parks, supply depots, fuel dumps, and artillery positions spread across hundreds of square miles. German intelligence officers studying the photographs nodded with satisfaction. The Red Army was clearly preparing for a southern offensive, just as predicted. But those tank parks were filled with plywood T-34s painted with meticulous attention to detail. The supply depots contained empty wooden crates arranged to cast the right shadows from above. The fuel dumps were actually water reservoirs covered with thin layers of oil, to create the telltale sheen of gasoline when photographed from altitude. Even the artillery positions were carefully crafted illusions, complete with fake muzzle flash simulators operated by hidden crews to create the impression of regular training exercises. The scale of this deception was staggering. Soviet workshops were producing fake tanks faster than some factories could build real ones. Each dummy T-34 required only 40 pounds of wood and canvas compared to 32 tons of steel for the genuine article. A single truck could transport 20 inflatable tanks that, when properly positioned and camouflaged, would appear on German aerial photographs as an entire armored battalion. Meanwhile, 400 miles to the north, the real Soviet offensive was taking shape in the forests and swamps around Vitebsk and Orsha. This was where Army Group Center had established what they believed to be an impregnable defensive line. After all, why would the Soviets attack through such difficult terrain when they could strike south through open tank country toward the oil fields? German commanders had concentrated their reserves accordingly, leaving Army Group Center undermanned and overconfident. The Red Army's actual preparations were hidden through an entirely different kind of deception. Real tanks moved only at night, their engines muffled and tracks wrapped in cloth to reduce noise. During daylight hours, they remained concealed under camouflage netting so sophisticated that German reconnaissance flights detected nothing unusual. Supply convoys followed forest roads invisible from the air. Artillery positions were dug into hillsides and covered with natural vegetation that perfectly matched the surrounding landscape. But the Soviets weren't content with merely hiding their real forces. They actively enhanced the illusion in the South through what intelligence officers called ambient deception. Radio operators transmitted false communications using the call signs of units that existed only on paper. These phantom divisions reported supply shortages, requested reinforcements, and complained about the muddy conditions near the Dnieper River. German signals intelligence dutifully recorded every transmission, building a detailed picture of Soviet intentions that was completely fabricated. Construction crews worked around the clock to build fake airfields complete with dummy aircraft arranged in neat rows. The planes were crafted from wood and canvas, but German aerial photographers couldn't tell the difference from 20,000 feet. Fake radar installations appeared overnight, complete with rotating antenna arrays operated by concealed motors. Even the personnel were part of the deception. Actors dressed as Soviet officers would walk between the dummy positions during known German reconnaissance times, ensuring that human activity would be visible in the photographs. The psychological warfare component was equally sophisticated. Soviet intelligence allowed carefully selected German agents to observe the fake preparations in the South, ensuring that these double agents would report back to their handlers about the massive buildup near Kiev. Captured German prisoners were interrogated in rooms where maps of southern Ukraine were prominently displayed, with unit positions marked in red ink. When these prisoners were later repatriated through neutral channels, they carried with them detailed mental pictures of Soviet planning that was entirely false. By early June 1944, German intelligence had identified what appeared to be 40 Soviet divisions massing for an offensive against Army Group South Ukraine. Wehrmacht commanders responded exactly as the Soviets had hoped. Panzer reserves were moved south. Air support was concentrated over the Romanian oil fields. Even the elite SS divisions were repositioned to counter what seemed to be an obvious threat to Germany's most vital strategic resource. The irony was perfect. While German generals studied photographs of fake Soviet tanks and plotted defensive strategies against phantom armies, the real Red Army was completing final preparations for Operation Bagration. Over 1 million Soviet troops, 4,000 real tanks, and 24D in complete secrecy along 1,000 artillery pieces had been positioned 500-mile front that the Germans considered secondary. The stage was set for one of the most devastating surprises in military history. But creating the illusion was only half the battle. The other half involved maintaining operational security so tight that not even the Soviet officers commanding the fake armies knew the full scope of the deception. Compartmentalization was absolute. Engineers building dummy tanks were told they were creating training aids for new recruits. Radio operators transmitting false messages believed they were part of a communications exercise. Even senior commanders in the deception units thought they were preparing for an actual offensive that would begin after the real attack had drawn German reserves away. This level of security required extraordinary attention to detail. Soviet counterintelligence officers monitored every aspect of the fake buildup, watching for any sign that German spies might detect the deception. Dummy positions were maintained with the same discipline as real ones. Guards patrolled fake perimeters. Supply trucks delivered empty crates to non-existent units on regular schedules. The entire performance had to be flawless because a single mistake could expose the entire operation. The technical challenges were immense. How do you make a plywood tank cast the same shadow as a real one? Soviet engineers solved this by studying German aerial photography techniques and calculating exactly how shadows would appear at different times of day and seasons. Dummy vehicles were positioned with mathematical precision to create the right visual impression from above. Some fake tanks even included heating elements to match the thermal signature that German infrared cameras might detect. Weather presented another complication. Rain could destroy canvas camouflage or wash away carefully applied paint. Wind might shift dummy aircraft in ways that would reveal their artificial nature. Snow could accumulate differently on fake equipment compared to real vehicles. Soviet maintenance crews worked constantly to ensure that their theatrical army remained convincing through every change in conditions. The human cost of maintaining these elaborate deceptions was significant. Thousands of soldiers were assigned to operate fake equipment, transmit false radio messages, and maintain dummy positions that served no direct military purpose. These men faced the same dangers as frontline troops. German bombers regularly attacked the fake positions, and Soviet personnel manning the deceptions were sometimes killed, defending installations that existed only to fool enemy reconnaissance. Yet despite these sacrifices, the deception units took pride in their work. They understood that every convincing fake position potentially saved the lives of real soldiers preparing for the actual offensive. Colonel Ivan Petrov, commanding one of the dummy tank regiments south of Kiev, later wrote in his memoirs that his men approached their theatrical duties with the same seriousness as actual combat. They knew that German lives depended on their performance, and that knowledge drove them to extraordinary lengths of realism. The Soviets even created fake logistical networks to support their phantom armies. Supply convoys carrying empty boxes followed predetermined routes between dummy positions. These convoys moved during daylight hours when German reconnaissance was most active, ensuring maximum visibility. The trucks kicked up dust clouds that would be clearly visible in aerial photographs, suggesting the movement of heavy equipment and supplies. At night, the same trucks would return along different routes, creating the impression of continuous military traffic supporting a massive buildup. Soviet quartermasters developed an entire science around fake supply management. They calculated how much fuel a phantom tank division would consume, how many tons of ammunition would be required for training exercises, and how much food would be needed to feed non-existent troops. These calculations weren't academic exercises. German intelligence analysts would study supply convoy patterns to estimate the size and readiness of enemy forces. If the logistical footprint didn't match the apparent military buildup, the entire deception could unravel. The attention to detail extended to individual soldiers. Men assigned to deception units received special training in how to behave when enemy aircraft appeared overhead. They learned to scatter for cover in patterns that would suggest specific military formations. Some soldiers were designated as fake officers, wearing appropriate insignia and moving between positions in ways that would indicate command relationships to German observers. Others posed as maintenance crews, pretending to service dummy equipment with the same urgency they would show working on real tanks. Communication security became an art form. Soviet radio operators developed hundreds of fictional characters, each with distinct transmission styles and vocabulary patterns. Captain Mikhail Volkov might complain about mechanical problems with his tanks using technical language and military jargon. Private Boris Semenov would report supply shortages in the casual tone of an ordinary soldier. These radio personalities became so convincing that German intelligence officers began tracking individual Soviet commanders who existed only in the imagination of skilled operators. The fake airfields presented unique challenges. Dummy aircraft had to be repositioned regularly to suggest realistic flight operations. Soviet engineers developed elaborate systems of pulleys and cables that could move wooden fighters and bombers along fake runways, creating the impression of takeoffs and landings when viewed from above. Ground crews performed elaborate pantomimes of aircraft maintenance, refueling non-existent planes and loading imaginary bombs onto wooden wings. Weather became both an enemy and an ally. Rain that might damage canvas camouflage also provided natural cover for moving real equipment. Soviet commanders learned to time actual troop movements during storms when German reconnaissance flights would be grounded. Clear skies that threatened to expose genuine preparations also offered perfect conditions for German pilots to photograph fake positions with crystal clarity. The psychological pressure on deception units was intense. These soldiers knew they were performing for an audience of enemy intelligence officers who were actively trying to see through their performance. Every detail had to be perfect because trained German analysts would scrutinize every photograph, looking for inconsistencies that might reveal the deception. A single piece of equipment positioned incorrectly, a shadow falling at the wrong angle, or smoke rising from the wrong location, could expose months of careful preparation. Soviet engineers developed increasingly sophisticated techniques for creating convincing fake installations. They studied German bombing patterns to understand how real military targets appeared after air attacks. Dummy positions were then artificially damaged to match these patterns, complete with fake crater holes and scattered debris. Some installations included pyrotechnic devices that could simulate secondary explosions when German bombers struck fake ammunition dumps. The creation of phantom communication networks required extraordinary coordination. Soviet signals intelligence units monitored German radio intercepts to ensure their fake transmissions were being properly received and decoded. They adjusted transmission schedules and frequencies based on German listening patterns, ensuring maximum exposure for their fictional military traffic. Some messages were intentionally transmitted in codes that German cryptographers had already broken, guaranteeing that the false intelligence would reach enemy commanders. Training for deception operations became as rigorous as preparation for actual combat. Soldiers learned to operate dummy equipment with the same precision required for real weapons. They practiced camouflage techniques that would fool aerial photography while remaining invisible to ground observers. Some units conducted elaborate war games where they attempted to deceive their own reconnaissance flights, refining their techniques based on what Soviet pilots could detect from above. The economic efficiency of these deceptions was remarkable. A single wooden T-34 cost approximately 50 rubles to construct and could be built in 4 hours by a skilled carpenter. The same resources invested in a real tank would produce a 32-ton steel monster requiring months of factory time and precious raw materials. From a purely mathematical perspective, fake armies delivered extraordinary value. Every German bomber diverted to attack dummy positions meant fewer attacks on real Soviet installations. Quality control became essential as the scale of deception operations expanded. Soviet inspectors developed detailed checklists for evaluating fake installations. They measured shadow angles, tested camouflage effectiveness under different lighting conditions, and verified that dummy positions matched the visual characteristics of real military equipment. Installations that failed these inspections were rebuilt until they met exacting standards of realism. The human drama within these deception units was intense. Soldiers assigned to fake positions often felt disconnected from the real war effort. They maintained elaborate pretenses while knowing their weapons were made of wood and canvas. Yet many developed genuine pride in their theatrical skills, competing to create the most convincing dummy installations. Some units established informal awards for the most realistic fake tank or the most believable radio transmission. Soviet commanders recognized that sustaining these massive deceptions required constant innovation. German intelligence was not passive. Enemy analysts studied Soviet deception techniques and developed countermeasures designed to expose fake installations. The Red Army responded by continuously evolving their methods, creating increasingly sophisticated illusions that could withstand ever more careful scrutiny. The integration of real and fake elements became a signature of Soviet deception doctrine. Genuine artillery batteries were positioned among dummy guns to provide authentic muzzle flashes during fake training exercises. Real tanks were occasionally moved through fake positions to create authentic tracks in the mud. These hybrid installations became nearly impossible for German intelligence to fully decode, creating uncertainty that was almost as valuable as complete deception. By mid-June 1944, the Soviet Maskirovka had achieved something unprecedented in military history. An entire German army group had been psychologically repositioned, based on weapons that existed only as stage props. Wehrmacht intelligence officers were tracking the movements of phantom Soviet divisions with the same precision they applied to real units. The stage was set for Operation Bagration, to achieve complete tactical surprise against an enemy who was looking in exactly the wrong direction. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, American forces were orchestrating their own masterpiece of military theater. Operation Fortitude represented the culmination of Allied deception planning, but its success depended on lessons learned from earlier, smaller-scale experiments in the art of battlefield illusion. The Americans had been studying British deception techniques since 1942, when the legendary magician Jasper Maskelyne first demonstrated how stage magic could be adapted for military purposes in the North African desert. The genesis of American deception capabilities began with the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, a unit so secret that its very existence was classified for decades after the war. Officially designated as a headquarters unit, the 23rd was actually composed of artists, designers, actors, and sound engineers recruited from Hollywood studios, advertising agencies, and Broadway theaters. These men understood that fooling an audience required more than just visual props. It demanded a complete sensory experience that could withstand the scrutiny of trained observers. Colonel Harry Reeder, commanding the 23rd Special Troops, faced challenges that no military officer had ever confronted before. How do you train soldiers to become actors? How do you coordinate a performance across hundreds of square miles? And most critically, how do you ensure that your theatrical army appears authentic to enemy intelligence while remaining completely invisible to Allied forces operating in the same area? The technical requirements were staggering. American engineers had to develop inflatable tanks that could withstand European weather conditions, maintain their shape under varying atmospheric conditions pressure, and remain convincing when viewed through German optical equipment. Each rubber Sherman tank required precise attention to detail. The tracks had to show realistic wear patterns. The armor had to reflect light the same way genuine steel would. Even the positioning of fake equipment required mathematical calculation to ensure proper shadows and sightlines. Sound became a crucial element that the Soviets had largely overlooked. The 23rd Special Troops included a sonic deception company equipped with massive speakers capable of projecting the sounds of tank engines, artillery fire, and troop movements across distances of up to 15 miles. These audio illusions were recorded at actual military bases, capturing the authentic acoustic signatures of real equipment. German listeners trained to identify specific vehicle types by their engine sounds would hear exactly what they expected from genuine American armored formations. The psychological warfare component went far beyond simple audiovisual deception. American intelligence officers created elaborate fictional histories for their Phantom units. The fictitious 14th Armored Division received detailed service records, complete with battle honors, casualty reports, and personnel transfers that German spies could verify through multiple intelligence channels. This Phantom Division even had its own newspaper, distributed through prisoner-of-war camps where German captives could read about the unit's supposed activities and report back to their intelligence networks. Creating believable military radio traffic required unprecedented coordination between genuine and fake units. American signals intelligence had broken enough German codes to understand exactly how Wehrmacht communications analysts evaluated enemy transmissions. The 23rd Special Troops developed sophisticated protocols for generating fake radio chatter that would pass German scrutiny while avoiding interference with real Allied communications. Operators transmitted thousands of fictional messages daily, creating the electronic signature of military units that existed only on paper. The logistics of maintaining these massive deceptions across multiple locations simultaneously pushed American organizational capabilities to their limits. Supply convoys carrying inflatable equipment had to follow predetermined routes that would maximize visibility to German reconnaissance while avoiding detection by Allied forces who weren't cleared for the deception operations. Coordination required split-second timing. A fake tank battalion had to appear at location A on Tuesday, disappear overnight, and reappear at location B on Wednesday, creating the impression of rapid military redeployment. Weather presented constant challenges that required immediate adaptation. Rain could collapse inflatable equipment or wash away carefully applied camouflage paint. Wind might shift dummy aircraft in unnatural ways that would reveal their artificial nature to aerial observers. Snow accumulation patterns differed between real and fake equipment, potentially exposing the deception to German analysts who understood these subtle visual clues. American maintenance crews developed rapid response protocols for weather emergencies, racing to preserve their illusions under changing atmospheric conditions. The human element proved most complex of all. Soldiers assigned to deception units had to master the art of appearing busy while accomplishing nothing of military value. They learned to perform maintenance on fake equipment with the same urgency they would show servicing real tanks. Some men specialized in creating authentic-looking tire tracks and footprints around dummy positions. Others became expert at generating realistic patterns of human activity that would be visible in German aerial photographs. Quality control reached obsessive levels of detail. American inspectors evaluated fake installations using the same photographic equipment employed by German reconnaissance aircraft. They analyzed shadow patterns at different times of day, tested camouflage effectiveness under various weather conditions, and verified that dummy positions matched the visual characteristics expected from genuine military formations. Installations that failed these rigorous evaluations were completely rebuilt until they achieved perfect authenticity. The integration of real and fake elements became a signature technique of American deception operations. Genuine artillery pieces were occasionally positioned among dummy guns to provide authentic muzzle flashes during simulated training exercises. Real vehicles periodically moved through fake positions to create convincing tire tracks in the mud. These hybrid installations became nearly impossible for German intelligence to fully decode, generating the uncertainty that was often more valuable than complete deception. American psychological warfare specialists understood that the most effective deceptions exploited enemy expectations rather than contradicting them. German intelligence anticipated that Allied invasion forces would require massive logistical support, extensive preliminary bombardment, and concentrated armored formations. Operation Fortitude gave them exactly what they expected to see, but in completely the wrong location. The Phantom 1st Army Group assembling near Calais represented everything Wehrmacht commanders believed about Allied invasion doctrine, perfectly positioned where German strategic thinking suggested the attack must come. The scale of American fake equipment production rivaled some genuine military manufacturing programs. Factories in Ohio and Pennsylvania produced thousands of inflatable tanks, artillery pieces, and aircraft using techniques borrowed from the tire and balloon industries. Each dummy Sherman required approximately 100 pounds of rubber and canvas, compared to 33 tons of steel for a genuine tank. Production costs averaged $85 per inflatable vehicle, making fake armies extraordinarily cost-effective compared to real armored divisions. Training programs for deception personnel became as rigorous as preparation for actual combat operations. Soldiers learned to operate dummy equipment with military precision while maintaining the illusion of genuine activity. They practiced camouflage techniques designed to fool aerial photography while remaining invisible to ground observers. Some units conducted elaborate exercises where they attempted to deceive their own reconnaissance flights, refining techniques based on what American pilots could detect from above. The coordination between American and British deception efforts required unprecedented intelligence sharing and operational synchronization. Both nations had to ensure their fake armies told the same story when viewed by German analysts. Radio transmissions from phantom American units had to coordinate with fictional British formations. Supply convoys supporting fake installations had to follow routes that made strategic sense when combined with genuine Allied logistics. The entire deception required choreography across multiple intelligence agencies and military commands. Communications security became an art form requiring constant innovation. American radio operators developed hundreds of fictional military personalities, each with distinct transmission styles and vocabulary patterns. Major John Anderson might report mechanical problems using formal military language. Sergeant Mike O'Brien would request supplies in casual soldier slang. These radio characters became so convincing that German intelligence officers began tracking individual American commanders who existed only in the imagination of skilled communications specialists. The economic efficiency of deception operations impressed even skeptical military accountants. A single inflatable tank cost approximately $85 to produce and could be manufactured in 8 hours by skilled workers. The same resources invested in genuine armored vehicles would yield massive steel machines, requiring months of factory production and precious raw materials. From a purely mathematical perspective, fake armies delivered extraordinary return on investment. Every German bomber diverted to attack dummy positions meant fewer strikes against real Allied installations. Advanced techniques for creating convincing battle damage became essential as deception operations expanded. American engineers studied German bombing patterns to understand how genuine military targets appeared after air attacks. Dummy installations were then artificially damaged to match these characteristics, complete with simulated crater holes and scattered debris. Some positions included pyrotechnic devices that could produce realistic secondary explosions when German aircraft struck fake ammunition depots. The psychological pressure on American deception personnel was intense, but different from combat stress. These soldiers knew they were performing for an audience of enemy intelligence officers, actively trying to expose their theatrical efforts. Every detail required perfection, because trained German analysts would examine every photograph with magnifying glasses, searching for inconsistencies that might reveal the elaborate charade. A single piece of equipment positioned incorrectly could compromise months of careful preparation. Weather reconnaissance became crucial for maintaining convincing illusions across changing seasonal conditions. American meteorologists developed detailed forecasts specifically for deception operations, predicting how atmospheric conditions would affect the appearance of fake installations when viewed from German reconnaissance aircraft. Clear skies that threatened to expose genuine preparations also provided perfect photographic conditions for enemy pilots to document fake positions with crystal clarity. The creation of phantom supply networks required extraordinary attention to logistical detail. American quartermasters calculated exactly how much fuel a fake armored division would consume, how many tons of ammunition would be required for training exercises, and how much food would be needed to feed non-existent troops. These calculations weren't academic exercises. German intelligence analysts studied supply convoy patterns to estimate the size and combat readiness of enemy forces. Inconsistent logistical footprints could expose entire deception operations. Integration with genuine Allied operations demanded precise coordination that pushed military communication systems to their limits. Real units had to modify their activities to support fake ones without compromising actual military effectiveness. Genuine supply convoys sometimes detoured through fake positions to create authentic tire tracks. Real aircraft occasionally flew over dummy installations to generate convincing flight patterns that German observers would interpret as routine military activity. The development of specialized equipment for deception operations spawned entirely new military technologies. American engineers created portable sound systems capable of projecting tank engine noise across distances of 20 miles. They developed inflatable aircraft so realistic that German pilots reported engaging them in aerial combat. Some dummy installations included remote-controlled elements that could simulate human activity when German reconnaissance flights appeared overhead. Training facilities for deception specialists became elaborate theatrical schools where soldiers learned acting techniques alongside military skills. Personnel studied German reconnaissance methods to understand exactly what enemy observers would notice from various altitudes and angles. They practiced creating authentic-looking patterns of human activity while avoiding behaviors that might expose the artificial nature of their installations. Some specialists became so skilled at their theatrical roles that they could maintain convincing performances even under direct enemy observation. The success of American deception operations ultimately depended on exploiting fundamental assumptions within German military doctrine. Wehrmacht commanders believed they understood Allied invasion planning because they had studied British and American tactical preferences for months. Operation Fortitude succeeded because it confirmed these preconceptions while directing German attention toward the wrong beaches. The Phantom Armies assembling near Calais represented everything German intelligence expected from a genuine Allied invasion, positioned exactly where strategic logic suggested the attack would come. By early June 1944, American deception specialists had achieved something unprecedented in the history of warfare. They had convinced an entire enemy army group to defend against an invasion that would never come. Using nothing more than inflatable tanks, recorded sound effects, and theatrical performances. German intelligence officers were tracking the movements of phantom American divisions with the same analytical precision they applied to genuine military units. The stage was set for the real Allied forces to achieve complete tactical surprise on the beaches of Normandy. The success of both Soviet Maskirovka and American deception operations hinged on a fundamental understanding of human psychology that military academies had never taught. Enemy intelligence officers, no matter how skilled, could only analyze what they observed. If you could control their observations, you could control their conclusions. But this required more than just visual tricks. It demanded the creation of entire fictional narratives that would satisfy the analytical mind studying every photograph, intercept, and reconnaissance report. German intelligence had developed sophisticated methods for evaluating enemy capabilities. They counted tank tracks in mud to estimate armored strength. They measured the width of supply roads to calculate logistical capacity. They analyzed radio transmission patterns to map command structures. Both the Soviets and Americans had to account for every one of these analytical techniques while constructing their elaborate deceptions. The technical challenges pushed engineering creativity to extraordinary limits. How do you make wooden tank tracks leave convincing impressions in soft ground? Soviet engineers solved this by creating specialized rollers that could be pulled behind trucks to simulate the distinctive tread patterns of T-34 tanks. American specialists developed similar devices for Sherman tank tracks, complete with the proper spacing between individual track links and the correct depth of impression based on vehicle weight distribution. Radio deception evolved into a complex communications procedures. German signals intelligence had cataloged the electronic signatures of various Allied and Soviet units, science, requiring deep understanding of enemy, learning to identify specific formations by their transmission characteristics. Defeating this required phantom radio operators to master not just the technical aspects of military communications, but the subtle behavioral patterns that distinguished one unit from another. Captain James Mitchell of the 23rd Special Troops spent months studying intercepted German radio traffic to understand how Wehrmacht units communicated. He discovered that Bavarian officers used different technical terminology than Prussian commanders. Radio operators from rural backgrounds had distinct speech patterns compared to those from industrial cities. These insights allowed American deception specialists to create fake German communications that would sound authentic to enemy listeners, further confusing Wehrmacht intelligence about Allied intentions. The Soviets approached radio deception with characteristic thoroughness. Major Dmitry Kozlov, commanding a Phantom tank regiment, required his operators to develop complete biographical backgrounds for their fictional characters. Private Ivan Petrov from Stalingrad would complain about mechanical problems using the technical vocabulary of a factory worker. Sergeant Boris Volkov from a farming village would discuss supply shortages with the practical knowledge of someone accustomed to making do with limited resources. These radio personalities became so convincing that German intelligence officers began tracking individual Soviet commanders who existed only in the imagination of skilled communications specialists. Weather presented constant challenges that required immediate adaptation and innovative solutions. Rain could destroy canvas camouflage or wash away carefully applied paint, but it also provided natural cover for repositioning equipment. Soviet engineers learned to use weather as a tactical advantage, moving genuine forces during storms when German reconnaissance flights would be grounded, while simultaneously using clear conditions to showcase their fake installations with perfect photographic clarity. The Americans developed sophisticated weather prediction systems specifically for deception operations. Meteorologists attached to the 23rd Special Troops provided detailed forecasts about atmospheric conditions that would affect the appearance of dummy installations when viewed from German aircraft. They calculated how different cloud formations would alter shadow patterns, how humidity would affect the visibility of dust clouds from fake vehicle movements, and how seasonal changes would modify the thermal signatures that German infrared cameras might detect. Maintenance of these elaborate illusions required constant vigilance and rapid response capabilities. American crews developed protocols for emergency repairs that could restore damaged fake installations within hours of discovery. They carried specialized repair kits containing pre-cut camouflage materials, replacement components for inflatable equipment, and portable painting supplies that could match any weather-faded colors. Some maintenance teams became so efficient they could completely rebuild a dummy tank position during the brief window between German reconnaissance flights. The Soviet approach to maintenance was characteristically systematic. Each fake installation received daily inspections using detailed checklists that covered everything from proper shadow alignment to authentic wear patterns on dummy equipment. Maintenance crews practiced rapid deployment techniques until they could transform empty fields into convincing military positions within 6 hours of receiving orders. Quality control inspectors used the same photographic equipment employed by German reconnaissance aircraft to verify that their installations would pass enemy scrutiny. Integration between real and fake operations required unprecedented coordination across multiple command levels. Genuine Soviet artillery batteries had to coordinate their firing schedules with fake positions to ensure that muzzle flashes appeared at dummy locations during German observation periods. Real tank units occasionally drove through fake positions to create authentic tire tracks and exhaust stains that would be visible in aerial photographs. These hybrid operations became so complex that specialized liaison officers were assigned solely to coordinate between actual military units and deception specialists. The Americans faced similar coordination challenges, but approached them with characteristic organizational efficiency. Real Allied supply convoys were rerouted through fake positions to create authentic logistical footprints. Genuine aircraft flew predetermined patterns over dummy airfields to simulate realistic flight operations. Some real military units were temporarily assigned to support deception operations, with soldiers spending days creating authentic patterns of human activity around fake installations before returning to their actual duties. Training programs for deception personnel evolved into elaborate theatrical academies where military discipline merged with performance art. Soviet soldiers assigned to dummy positions learned to move with the purposeful urgency of real tank crews while servicing equipment made of wood and canvas. They practiced scattering for cover when enemy aircraft appeared, creating movement patterns that would suggest specific military formations to German observers watching from above. American training was equally sophisticated, but reflected different cultural approaches to performance. Hollywood veterans recruited into the 23rd Special Troops taught soldiers method acting techniques that would help them embody their fictional roles convincingly. Some personnel became so skilled at their theatrical duties that they could maintain convincing performances even when directly observed by enemy agents or curious local civilians who might report unusual activities to German intelligence networks. The psychological impact on personnel assigned to these phantom armies was profound and largely underestimated by military planners. Soldiers maintaining fake positions often felt disconnected from the actual war effort, spending months perfecting illusions while their comrades fought genuine battles. Yet many developed extraordinary pride in their specialized skills, competing to create the most convincing dummy installations and celebrating successful deceptions with the same enthusiasm other units reserved for combat victories. Soviet deception units developed their own informal traditions and recognition systems. Outstanding performances in fooling German reconnaissance were celebrated with special commendations. Some phantom regiments maintained detailed records of enemy aircraft they had successfully deceived, treating these encounters like aerial combat victories. The most skilled operators who could maintain convincing radio personas for months without detection earned reputations throughout the Red Army intelligence community. The economic mathematics of deception operations impressed military accountants on both sides of the Atlantic. American analyses showed that every dollar invested in fake equipment generated approximately $15 worth of genuine military effectiveness by misdirecting enemy resources. Soviet calculations were equally favorable, with wooden tank regiments costing roughly 2% of genuine armored formations, while achieving comparable strategic impact through misdirection of German defensive preparations. Resource allocation for deception programs competed with genuine military needs, creating internal tensions within Allied command structures. Some traditional officers questioned devoting scarce materials and personnel to elaborate theatrical productions when those resources could support actual combat units. However, statistical analysis of enemy responses vindicated these investments. German bomber sorties diverted to attack fake installations meant fewer attacks on real Allied positions, saving both equipment and lives through strategic misdirection. The development of counter-deception techniques became an increasingly sophisticated aspect of intelligence warfare. German analysts began looking for subtle inconsistencies that might expose fake installations, such as unnatural wear patterns on dummy equipment or implausible logistical arrangements around phantom positions. This forced both Soviet and American deception specialists to continuously evolve their methods, creating increasingly elaborate illusions that could withstand ever more careful scrutiny. Advanced German reconnaissance techniques posed constant challenges to deception operations. High-resolution photography could reveal details that might expose fake installations to trained analysts. Infrared cameras could detect thermal differences between real and dummy equipment. Electronic intelligence gathering could identify inconsistencies in radio transmission patterns that might indicate fictional communications networks. Successful deception required staying ahead of these technological advances through continuous innovation and adaptation. The Soviets responded to enhanced German surveillance by developing increasingly sophisticated camouflage techniques. They studied captured German reconnaissance equipment to understand exactly what enemy cameras could detect under various conditions. This led to innovations like heated dummy tanks that would match the thermal signature of real vehicles, and radio transmitters that could precisely mimic the electronic characteristics of genuine Soviet communications equipment. American counterintelligence became equally advanced, with specialists studying German analytical methods to understand how enemy intelligence officers evaluated photographic evidence. They discovered that Wehrmacht analysts had developed mathematical formulas for calculating the logistical requirements of various military formations. This knowledge allowed American deception planners to ensure their fake supply networks matched exactly what German calculations would predict for genuine units of equivalent size. The creation of fictional military histories for phantom units required extraordinary attention to detail and historical consistency. The American 14th Armored Division needed service records that would satisfy German intelligence officers who might cross-reference unit activities across multiple sources. These fictional histories included casualty reports, equipment requisitions, personnel transfers, and even disciplinary actions that created convincing portraits of genuine military organizations. Soviet phantom divisions received equally elaborate fictional backgrounds, complete with battle honors, commander biographies, and unit traditions that could withstand detailed enemy investigation. Some of these fictional histories became so detailed that they included invented regimental songs, unofficial unit nicknames, and even fabricated stories about specific battles that never occurred. German intelligence officers studying these materials found consistent narratives that reinforced their conclusions about Soviet military capabilities and intentions. The coordination required to maintain these massive deceptions across thousands of square miles simultaneously pushed military communication systems beyond their design limits. Radio networks had to carry enormous volumes of fictional traffic without interfering with genuine military communications. Supply systems had to support elaborate theatrical productions while maintaining actual combat operations. Transportation networks had to move fake equipment and deception personnel without compromising real military movements. Command and control structures for deception operations required unprecedented flexibility and compartmentalization. Officers commanding phantom units needed detailed knowledge of their fictional roles while remaining completely ignorant of actual military plans that might be compromised if they were captured. This created complex information management challenges that military organizations had never faced before, requiring new protocols for maintaining operational security across multiple levels of classification. The integration of deception operations with genuine military planning reached extraordinary levels of sophistication by mid-1944. Soviet offensive preparations for Operation Bagration had to account for German forces that would be misdirected by fake buildup activities in the South. American invasion planning for D-Day required precise calculation of how many German divisions would be held in reserve near Calais by the Phantom First Army Group. These strategic deceptions became integral components of actual battle plans rather than mere supporting activities. Quality control for deception operations established standards that rivaled those of genuine military equipment production. Soviet inspectors developed detailed evaluation criteria for dummy installations, measuring everything from proper shadow angles to authentic rust patterns on fake metal surfaces. American quality assurance teams used captured German reconnaissance photographs to verify that their installations appeared convincing when viewed through enemy optical equipment. The human cost of maintaining these elaborate deceptions extended beyond the obvious dangers of operating near enemy positions. Personnel assigned to deception units faced unique psychological stresses from performing elaborate pretenses for months at a time. Some soldiers reported difficulty distinguishing between their theatrical roles and genuine military duties. Others struggled with feelings of disconnection from the actual war effort while maintaining fake positions that served no direct combat purpose. Medical support for deception personnel required specialized understanding of performance-related stress disorders. Military psychiatrists had to develop new treatment protocols for soldiers suffering from what became known as theatrical fatigue, exhaustion resulting from maintaining elaborate pretenses under constant enemy observation. Some deception specialists required extended rest periods to recover from the mental strain of their unique duties. The technical evolution of deception equipment accelerated throughout 1944 as both sides refined their methods based on operational experience. Soviet engineers developed modular dummy systems that could be rapidly reconfigured to represent different types of military equipment. American specialists created increasingly sophisticated inflatable vehicles with internal structures that would maintain realistic shapes under varying atmospheric conditions. Sound deception technology reached remarkable levels of sophistication, with American sonic specialists creating audio libraries containing thousands of recorded military sounds. These recordings captured not just the obvious noise of tank engines and artillery fire, but subtle ambient sounds like radio chatter, maintenance activities, and even the distinctive acoustic signatures of different types of military vehicles operating at various speeds and loads. The Soviets developed their own acoustic deception capabilities, though with characteristically different approaches. Rather than relying primarily on recorded sounds, Soviet engineers created mechanical devices that could generate realistic engine noise, track sounds, and artillery fire using relatively simple equipment operated by small crews. These devices could operate continuously for days without the power requirements that limited American electronic systems. By June 1944, both the Soviet Maskirovka, supporting Operation Bagration, and the American Operation Fortitude had achieved something unprecedented in military history. They had successfully convinced enemy commanders to make strategic decisions based entirely on fictional military formations. German intelligence officers were tracking phantom armies with the same analytical precision they applied to genuine threats, allocating real defensive resources to counter imaginary offensive capabilities. The stage was now set for the most decisive test of these elaborate deceptions. Within days, both the Red Army and Allied forces would launch their actual offensives against enemies who had been psychologically maneuvered into defending against attacks that would never come. The success or failure of these operations would determine whether the art of military deception had truly revolutionized the mathematics of modern warfare, or whether elaborate theatrical productions were merely expensive diversions from genuine military capabilities. The moment of truth arrived on June 23, 1944, when Soviet artillery opened the preliminary bombardment for Operation Bagration. German commanders along the Belarusian front initially dismissed the attack as a diversionary action, convinced that the real Soviet offensive would come in the south, where their intelligence had tracked massive Red Army buildup for weeks. Wehrmacht generals maintained their defensive dispositions, keeping precious reserves concentrated near Kyiv, while Army Group Center faced the full fury of over 1 million Soviet troops attacking through supposedly impassable terrain. Within 72 hours, the entire German defensive line had collapsed. The phantom armies that had consumed so much German attention in southern Ukraine remained motionless in their fake positions, while real Soviet tank corps smashed through weakened defenses 400 miles to the north. German intelligence officers frantically studied their reconnaissance photographs, unable to comprehend how such massive Soviet forces had appeared seemingly from nowhere. The wooden tanks and canvas artillery pieces south of Kiev continued their silent vigil, while genuine Red Army divisions advanced 50 miles per day through the shattered remnants of Army Group Center. General Friedrich VI von Arnim, commanding the German Fourth Army, later wrote in his memoirs that the Soviet deception had achieved something he previously thought impossible. An entire army group had been strategically repositioned, based on enemy forces that existed only as stage props. His divisions had prepared for months to counter an offensive that never materialized, while the real attack struck where German planners least expected it. The mathematical precision of Soviet Maskirovka had transformed the fundamental calculus of Eastern Front warfare. Meanwhile, across the English Channel, American and British forces were making final preparations for their own test of deception warfare. Operation Fortitude had convinced German intelligence that the main Allied invasion would strike at Calais, where the fictional First Army Group under General George Patton had assembled what appeared to be the largest invasion force in military history. Wehrmacht commanders had positioned their strongest reserves to defend against this phantom threat, leaving the actual landing zones in Normandy defended by second-rate divisions and foreign conscripts. Colonel Oskar Ryle, chief of German counterintelligence in Western Europe, had spent months analyzing Allied invasion preparations. His intelligence network had identified massive military buildup around Dover and Folkestone, complete with detailed reports on troop concentrations, supply depots, and naval facilities that would obviously support cross-channel operations. Every photograph, every radio intercept, every agent report confirmed that Allied forces were preparing to strike across the narrowest part of the English Channel toward the heavily fortified Pas-de-Calais region. What Ryle didn't know was that his intelligence network was feeding him carefully orchestrated fiction. The massive military installations his agents reported were elaborate theatrical productions staffed by specialists from Hollywood studios and Broadway theaters. The radio traffic his signals intelligence units intercepted was generated by skilled operators creating fictional military personalities. Even the Allied supply convoys his reconnaissance flights photographed were carrying inflatable equipment that could transform empty fields into convincing military positions within hours. The technical sophistication of these deceptions had reached extraordinary levels by early June 1944. American engineers had perfected inflatable Sherman tanks so realistic pilots that German reported engaging them in combat. Each rubber vehicle required precise attention to detail, from authentic wear patterns on the tracks to proper light reflection characteristics that would match genuine steel armor when photographed from reconnaissance aircraft. The manufacturing process had become so efficient, producing fake factories, or that American tanks faster than some facilities could build real ones. Sound deception had evolved into a precise science that exploited German listening posts along the Atlantic Wall. The 23rd Special Troops had recorded authentic audio signatures from actual Allied military bases, capturing everything from tank engine noise to artillery fire with such fidelity that German acoustic specialists could identify specific vehicle types and calibers. These recordings were then projected across distances of up to 20 miles using massive speaker arrays, creating the auditory footprint of armored divisions that existed only as rubber and canvas props. The psychological warfare component extended far beyond simple audio-visual tricks. Allied intelligence had created complete fictional histories for phantom military units, complete with service records that German spies could verify through multiple channels. The non-existent 14th Armored Division had detailed casualty reports, equipment requisitions, and personnel transfers that created a convincing portrait of a genuine military organization preparing for combat operations. Radio deception required unprecedented coordination between real and fictional communications networks. Allied signals specialists had to generate thousands of fake military transmissions daily while avoiding interference with genuine operational traffic. German signals intelligence was monitoring every frequency, analyzing transmission patterns to map Allied command structures and estimate invasion timing. The fictional radio traffic had to satisfy these analytical efforts while directing German attention toward completely wrong conclusions about Allied intentions. The logistics of maintaining these massive deceptions simultaneously across multiple locations pushed Allied organizational capabilities to extraordinary limits. Supply convoys carrying inflatable equipment had to follow predetermined routes that would maximize visibility to German reconnaissance while remaining completely invisible to Allied personnel not cleared for deception operations. The coordination required split-second timing, with fake military units appearing and disappearing according to carefully choreographed schedules designed to suggest realistic troop movements. Weather presented constant operational challenges that required immediate adaptation. Rain could collapse inflatable tanks or wash away camouflage paint that had taken days to apply properly. Wind might shift dummy aircraft in unnatural patterns that would reveal their artificial nature to trained German observers. Snow accumulation created different visual signatures on fake equipment compared to genuine vehicles, potentially exposing months of careful preparation to enemy analysts who understood these subtle differences. Advanced German reconnaissance techniques posed continuous threats to deception security. High-resolution photography could reveal construction details that might expose fake installations to experienced intelligence officers. Infrared cameras could detect thermal differences between real and dummy equipment. Electronic surveillance could identify inconsistencies in radio transmission patterns that indicated fictional communications networks. Success required staying ahead of these technological advances through constant innovation and rapid adaptation. The human element proved most complex of all these operational challenges. Soldiers assigned to deception units had to master theatrical techniques while maintaining military discipline under enemy observation. They learned to create authentic patterns of human activity around fake positions, scattering for cover when German aircraft appeared overhead in ways that would suggest specific military formations to observers watching from above. Some personnel became so skilled at their performances that they could maintain convincing roles even under direct enemy surveillance. Quality control reached obsessive levels of detail as deception operations expanded across hundreds of locations. American inspectors evaluated fake installations using captured German optical equipment to ensure authenticity when viewed through enemy reconnaissance systems. They measured shadow angles at different times of day, tested camouflage effectiveness under varying weather conditions, and verified that dummy positions matched the visual characteristics expected from genuine military formations of equivalent size and capability. The economic efficiency of these operations impressed even skeptical military accountants who initially questioned resource allocation for elaborate theatrical productions. Statistical analysis showed that every dollar invested in deception equipment generated approximately $15 worth of genuine military effectiveness by misdirecting enemy defensive preparations. German bomber sorties diverted to attack fake installations meant fewer strikes against real Allied positions, saving both equipment and lives through strategic misdirection. Integration between deception operations and genuine military planning reached unprecedented levels of sophistication. Allied invasion planners had to calculate precisely how many German divisions would be held in reserve near Calais by the Phantom First Army Group. Soviet offensive preparations required accounting for Wehrmacht forces that would be misdirected by fake buildup activities hundreds of miles from actual attack zones. These strategic deceptions became integral components of battle plans rather than mere supporting activities. The creation of phantom logistical networks required extraordinary attention to detail that satisfied German analytical methods. Enemy intelligence officers had developed mathematical formulas for calculating supply requirements of various military formations. Allied deception planners had to ensure their fake supply networks matched exactly what German calculations would predict for genuine units of equivalent size, complete with appropriate fuel consumption, ammunition stockpiles, and food distribution patterns. Communication security became an art form requiring constant innovation to stay ahead of German cryptographic capabilities. Allied radio operators developed hundreds of fictional military personalities, each with distinct transmission styles and vocabulary patterns that would satisfy enemy listeners trained to identify individual commanders through their communications habits. These radio characters became so convincing that German intelligence officers began tracking phantom Allied commanders who existed only in the imagination of skilled specialists. Training programs for deception personnel evolved into elaborate academies where military skills merged with performance techniques borrowed from professional theater. Hollywood veterans recruited into specialized units taught soldiers method-acting approaches that would help them embody fictional roles convincingly. Personnel learned to operate dummy equipment with the same precision required for genuine weapons while maintaining elaborate pretenses under constant enemy surveillance. The psychological pressure on deception units was intense, but different from traditional combat stress. These soldiers performed for audiences of enemy intelligence officers who were actively trying to expose their theatrical efforts. Every detail required perfection, because trained German analysts would examine photographs with magnifying equipment searching for inconsistencies that might reveal elaborate charades. Single mistakes could compromise months of preparation and endanger actual military operations. Advanced techniques for creating battle damage became essential as operations expanded. Engineers studied German bombing patterns to understand how genuine targets appeared after air attacks, then artificially damaged dummy installations to match these characteristics. Some positions included pyrotechnic devices that could simulate secondary explosions when enemy aircraft struck fake ammunition depots, enhancing the realism of their theatrical performances. The development of specialized equipment spawned entirely new military technologies. American engineers created portable sound systems capable of projecting tank noise across 20-mile distances. They developed inflatable aircraft so realistic that some German pilots reported engaging them in aerial combat. Soviet specialists designed modular dummy systems that could be rapidly reconfigured to represent different military equipment types depending on operational requirements. Counterintelligence measures became increasingly sophisticated as German analysts developed new methods for detecting deception operations. Enemy reconnaissance began looking for subtle inconsistencies such as unnatural wear patterns on dummy equipment or implausible logistical arrangements around phantom positions. This forced continuous evolution of deception techniques, creating increasingly elaborate illusions that could withstand ever more careful scrutiny from trained intelligence specialists. The coordination between Allied deception efforts required unprecedented intelligence sharing across multiple national organizations. American Phantom units had to coordinate with fictional British formations so their combined activities would tell consistent stories when analyzed by German intelligence. Radio transmissions from fake formations had to integrate seamlessly with genuine military communications without creating contradictions that might expose the entire operation. Resource management for deception programs competed directly with genuine military needs, creating internal tensions within Allied command structures. Traditional officers questioned devoting scarce materials and personnel to theatrical productions when those resources could support actual combat units. However, statistical analysis of German responses vindicated these investments, showing measurable strategic benefits from misdirecting enemy defensive preparations. Medical support for deception personnel required understanding of unique psychological stresses resulting from maintaining elaborate pretenses for extended periods. Military psychiatrists developed treatment protocols for conditions they termed theatrical fatigue, exhaustion from performing fictional roles under constant enemy observation. Some specialists required extended rest periods to recover from mental strain that differed significantly from traditional combat stress. The technical evolution of equipment accelerated throughout early 1944 as operational experience revealed areas requiring improvement. Soviet engineers developed heating elements for dummy tanks that would match thermal signatures of real vehicles when viewed through German infrared cameras. American specialists created internal support structures for inflatable equipment that maintained realistic shapes under varying atmospheric pressure conditions. Quality assurance teams used captured German reconnaissance photographs to verify their installations appeared convincing when viewed through enemy optical systems. They discovered that Wehrmacht analysts had cataloged subtle visual characteristics that distinguished different vehicle types, leading to increasingly sophisticated dummy equipment that could satisfy these detailed analytical criteria. The success of both Soviet Masirovka and Allied deception operations hinged on exploiting fundamental assumptions within German military doctrine, rather than contradicting enemy expectations. Wehrmacht commanders believed they understood Soviet and Allied tactical preferences based on months of careful study. The deceptions succeeded because they confirmed these preconceptions while directing German attention toward completely wrong locations for actual offensive operations. By early June 1944, these elaborate theatrical productions had achieved something unprecedented in warfare history. Enemy army groups had been psychologically repositioned based on military formations that existed only as stage props and performance art. German intelligence officers were tracking phantom divisions with analytical precision equal to their evaluation of genuine threats, allocating real defensive resources to counter imaginary offensive capabilities. The stage was now set for the ultimate test of whether military deception could truly revolutionize modern warfare mathematics. Within days, both Soviet and Allied forces would launch their actual offensives against enemies who had been strategically maneuvered into defending against attacks that would never materialize. Success would vindicate years of investment in theatrical military techniques. Failure would expose the limitations of elaborate deception against competent enemy intelligence analysis. The morning of June 6, 1944, would determine whether rubber tanks and wooden artillery could indeed change the course of the war through pure psychological manipulation of enemy decision-making processes. German commanders from Normandy to Belarus were about to discover just how completely their strategic thinking had been compromised by enemies who understood that sometimes the most powerful weapon on any battlefield was the one that existed only in the minds of those who feared it most. The first reports reached German High Command at 0630 hours on June 6th. Allied paratroopers had landed behind the Atlantic Wall in Normandy. Coastal radar stations reported massive naval formations approaching beaches that Wehrmacht intelligence had classified as secondary targets. General Jodl, Hitler's chief of operations, studied the initial reports with growing confusion. This couldn't be the main invasion. Every intelligence assessment for the past 6 months had confirmed that the primary Allied assault would strike at Calais, where General Patton's First Army Group had assembled the most formidable invasion force in military history. The Phantom Army that had consumed so much German attention remained motionless in its positions across the English Channel. Wooden landing craft continued their silent vigil in Dover Harbor, while real Allied divisions stormed ashore on beaches defended by undermanned coastal fortifications. German reserves stayed positioned near Calais, waiting for an attack that would never come. The inflatable Sherman tanks and canvas artillery pieces that had fooled Wehrmacht reconnaissance for months maintained their elaborate charade while genuine Allied armor pushed inland through Normandy's hedgerow country. Field Marshal Rommel, commanding Army Group B, frantically requested permission to move his panzer reserves from the Pas-de-Calais region to counter the Normandy landings. But Hitler himself had been convinced by the deception. The Führer insisted that the beach assaults were merely a diversion designed to draw German attention away from the real invasion that would obviously come at Calais. The Phantom First Army Group had achieved its ultimate purpose, freezing an entire army group in position through pure psychological manipulation. Lieutenant Colonel David Strangeways, mastermind of Operation Fortitude, monitored German radio traffic from his headquarters in London. Wehrmacht communications revealed exactly what Allied planners had hoped to achieve. German commanders were treating the Normandy landings as a secondary operation, while maintaining defensive positions against phantom armies that existed only in their imagination. The mathematics of deception had reached perfect expression. Real German divisions were defending against fake Allied formations, while genuine invasion forces encountered weakened opposition. The technical precision required to maintain this illusion under combat conditions pushed deception operations to their absolute limits. As Allied forces fought their way off the beaches, the Phantom First Army Group had to continue appearing ready for its own assault on Calais. American specialists worked around the clock to maintain their theatrical army, ensuring that German reconnaissance flights would continue photographing convincing evidence of massive military preparations that would never translate into actual combat operations. Radio deception became even more critical as the battle for Normandy intensified. German signals intelligence was monitoring every frequency, desperately trying to understand Allied intentions through analysis of communications patterns. The fictional radio traffic generated by phantom units had to maintain perfect consistency with the invasion narrative while avoiding any transmissions that might reveal the deception to increasingly suspicious German analysts. Weather added another layer of complexity to these operations. The same storms that had complicated the actual D-Day landings threatened to expose fake installations that couldn't withstand the same conditions as genuine equipment. American maintenance crews raced to preserve their illusions, while real soldiers fought for their lives on Norman beaches. The success of the entire invasion depended partly on maintaining elaborate theatrical productions that were becoming increasingly difficult to sustain under wartime conditions. The psychological impact on German decision-making exceeded even optimistic Allied projections. Wehrmacht commanders had become so convinced of their intelligence assessments that they interpreted genuine combat operations as elaborate deceptions. This cognitive dissonance paralyzed German response capabilities at the most critical moment of the war. Real Allied attacks were dismissed as diversions, while phantom armies commanded the full attention of enemy strategic planning. German field commanders began reporting contradictory observations that their intelligence officers couldn't reconcile with established assessments. The Normandy landings appeared more substantial than diversionary operations typically warranted. Yet every analysis confirmed that the main Allied assault had to come at Calais. This created analytical paralysis within Wehrmacht command structures that proved more valuable than any conventional military advantage. Colonel Alexis von Rohen, chief of German intelligence for Western Europe, found himself trapped by the very thoroughness of his own analysis. Months of careful study had produced overwhelming evidence that Allied invasion forces were concentrated near Dover. Every photograph, every radio intercept, every agent report confirmed this conclusion. The possibility that such comprehensive intelligence could be entirely fabricated seemed beyond credible consideration. The Phantom 1st Army Group continued its elaborate performance even as real Allied forces expanded their beachheads in Normandy. German reconnaissance flights still photographed massive concentrations of invasion equipment around Dover and Folkestone. Radio intercepts continued revealing preparation activities for cross-channel operations that German analysts expected would begin within days. The fictional army maintained perfect discipline in its non-existent mission, while genuine soldiers fought desperately to establish permanent footholds on French soil. Soviet Maskirovka achieved similar success as Operation Bagration continued devastating Army Group Center. German phantom offensives and commanders had positioned their reserves to counter southern Ukraine, while real Red Army spearheads advanced through Belarus at unprecedented speed. The wooden tank regiments that had consumed so much Wehrmacht attention remained motionless in their fake positions, while genuine Soviet armor exploited gaps created by strategic misdirection. General Gotthard Heinrici, one of Germany's most capable defensive specialists, later wrote that the Eastern Front had become incomprehensible to traditional military analysis. Soviet attacks were coming from directions that made no strategic sense, while massive enemy concentrations detected by German intelligence remained mysteriously inactive. The Red Army appeared to have developed the ability to appear and disappear at will, striking where least expected while maintaining threatening postures in multiple locations simultaneously. The human cost of these deception operations extended far beyond their obvious military value. Thousands of Allied and Soviet personnel continued maintaining elaborate theatrical productions, while their comrades died in actual combat. These soldiers faced unique psychological pressures from performing fictional roles, while real battles determined the war's outcome. Some reported feeling disconnected from genuine military achievements, wondering whether their theatrical contributions mattered compared to conventional combat operations. Technical innovation accelerated as both sides refined their deception capabilities based on wartime experience. American engineers developed increasingly sophisticated dummy equipment that could maintain convincing appearances even under direct enemy observation. Soviet specialists created modular fake installations that could be rapidly reconfigured to represent different types of military formations depending on tactical requirements. The economic mathematics of deception operations proved their strategic value through measurable results. Every German division held in reserve against phantom threats meant weaker opposition, facing real Allied and Soviet attacks. Statistical analysis showed that deception programs delivered extraordinary return on investment, generating military advantages that far exceeded their resource requirements. Fake armies had fundamentally altered the strategic calculus of modern warfare. Counter-deception efforts by German intelligence became increasingly desperate as the scope of Allied and Soviet theatrical operations became apparent. Wehrmacht analysts began developing new techniques for detecting fake installations, studying subtle visual clues that might expose dummy equipment to careful examination. This created an ongoing technological competition between deception specialists and counterintelligence officers that pushed both sides toward ever greater sophistication. The integration of deception operations with genuine military planning reached unprecedented levels of complexity. Real Allied and Soviet commanders had to coordinate their actual operations with fictional activities that were influencing enemy decision-making processes. This required careful calculation of how phantom armies would affect German responses to genuine military movements, creating strategic planning challenges that military academies had never contemplated. Quality control for deception operations maintained rigorous standards even under combat conditions. Allied and Soviet inspectors continued evaluating fake installations using enemy reconnaissance equipment to ensure authenticity when viewed through German optical systems. They understood that a single mistake could expose months of preparation and compromise ongoing military operations that depended on maintaining enemy confusion about actual Allied and Soviet capabilities. Communication security became even more critical as German cryptographic capabilities focused on detecting inconsistencies in Allied and Soviet transmissions. Radio operators maintaining fictional military personalities had to perfect their performances, while real communications networks carried urgent combat traffic. The coordination required to maintain these parallel information systems without creating contradictions pushed military communications beyond their designed limits. Advanced German surveillance techniques posed constant threats to deception security. High-resolution photography could reveal construction details that might expose fake equipment to experienced analysts. Electronic intelligence gathering could identify transmission patterns that indicated fictional communications networks. Thermal imaging could detect temperature differences between real and dummy installations. Success required continuous innovation to stay ahead of evolving enemy counter-deception capabilities. The psychological warfare component of these operations influenced German strategic thinking at the highest command levels. Hitler himself had become convinced that Allied deception capabilities were more limited than they actually were, leading him to discount genuine intelligence that contradicted his preconceptions about enemy intentions. This cognitive bias amplified the effectiveness of Allied and Soviet theatrical productions beyond their immediate tactical impact. Training programs for deception personnel continued evolving based on operational experience from actual combat conditions. Specialists learned to maintain convincing performances even when German aircraft conducted detailed reconnaissance of their positions. Some units developed techniques for creating authentic battle damage that would enhance the realism of their installations when enemy pilots reported bomb damage assessments. The development of specialized deception equipment spawned innovations that would influence military technology long after the war ended. Portable sound systems, advanced camouflage materials, and sophisticated dummy vehicles represented technological achievements that emerged from unique requirements of theatrical warfare. These innovations demonstrated how military necessity could drive creativity in unexpected directions. Resource allocation for deception programs competed with urgent combat requirements as the war intensified. Military planners had to balance investments in theatrical productions against immediate needs for genuine weapons and equipment. Statistical analysis consistently showed that deception operations delivered strategic value that justified their resource requirements, but these calculations required constant validation through measurable battlefield results. Medical support for deception personnel addressed unique psychological conditions resulting from maintaining fictional roles, while real combat operations determined the war's outcome. Military psychiatrists developed treatment protocols for stress disorders that differed significantly from traditional combat fatigue. Some specialists required extended recovery periods to readjust to genuine military duties after months of elaborate theatrical performances. The coordination between Allied and Soviet deception efforts remained limited by political considerations. But both sides recognized the mutual benefits of maintaining German confusion about their actual capabilities and intentions. Wehrmacht intelligence found itself overwhelmed by contradictory information from multiple sources, creating analytical paralysis that benefited all Allied operations regardless of their specific national origins. Weather reconnaissance became crucial for maintaining deception operations under changing seasonal conditions. Meteorologists provided detailed forecasts specifically for theatrical installations, predicting how atmospheric conditions would affect the appearance of fake equipment when viewed through German reconnaissance systems. Clear skies that threatened genuine military preparations also provided perfect conditions for enemy pilots to photograph convincing evidence of phantom armies. The creation of fictional supply networks required extraordinary attention to logistical detail that would satisfy German analytical methods. Enemy intelligence officers continued studying convoy patterns to estimate Allied and Soviet capabilities, making it essential that fake supply operations match mathematical predictions for genuine military formations. This demanded precise calculation of fuel consumption, ammunition requirements, and food distribution patterns for armies that existed only as elaborate performances. Quality assurance teams used captured German reconnaissance photographs to verify that their installations appeared authentic when evaluated through enemy analytical systems. They discovered that Wehrmacht intelligence had developed increasingly sophisticated criteria for distinguishing real from fake military equipment, forcing continuous refinement of deception techniques to maintain effectiveness against evolving countermeasures. The success of deception operations ultimately depended on exploiting cognitive biases within German command structures, rather than simply creating convincing visual illusions. Enemy commanders interpreted new information through existing analytical frameworks that Allied and Soviet deception specialists had learned to manipulate. This psychological dimension proved more important than technical perfection in maintaining effective strategic misdirection. Advanced battle damage simulation became essential as German bombing attacks on fake installations increased in intensity. Engineers developed techniques for creating realistic crater patterns, debris distribution, and fire damage that would enhance rather than compromise the authenticity of their theatrical productions. Some dummy positions included pyrotechnic devices that could generate convincing secondary explosions when struck by enemy aircraft. The human drama within deception units intensified as real combat operations accelerated around them. Personnel maintaining phantom armies could hear artillery fire from genuine battles while performing elaborate theatrical roles that seemed increasingly disconnected from actual military achievements. Yet these soldiers understood that their performances were influencing enemy strategic decisions that affected the outcome of real combat operations. Communication protocols for deception operations required constant adaptation to maintain security while supporting increasingly complex fictional narratives. Radio operators had to coordinate phantom military activities across multiple time zones and command structures without creating contradictions that might expose the elaborate charade to German signals intelligence. This demanded unprecedented skill in maintaining consistent fictional characters over extended periods under combat conditions. The technical sophistication of dummy equipment reached extraordinary levels as operational experience revealed areas requiring improvement. Inflatable tanks included internal heating systems that matched thermal signatures of genuine vehicles when viewed through German infrared cameras. Fake aircraft incorporated moving parts that would simulate realistic maintenance activities when observed by enemy reconnaissance flights. Integration between deception operations and genuine combat planning became so complex that specialized liaison officers were assigned solely to coordinate between real military units and theatrical productions. These officers had to ensure that Phantom armies would continue supporting actual operations while maintaining perfect security about genuine Allied and Soviet capabilities and intentions. The economic efficiency of deception programs continued demonstrating measurable strategic value, even as resource requirements increased under combat conditions. Every German division held in reserve against Phantom threats represented genuine tactical advantages for real Allied and Soviet forces engaging in actual combat operations. This mathematical relationship validated continued investment in elaborate theatrical productions despite competing demands for immediate military resources. Counterintelligence measures became increasingly sophisticated as the scope of Allied and Soviet deception operations became apparent to German analysts. Enemy reconnaissance began searching for subtle inconsistencies that might expose fake installations, forcing continuous evolution of deception techniques to maintain effectiveness against ever more careful scrutiny from experienced intelligence specialists. The coordination required to maintain these massive illusions simultaneously across multiple theaters pushed military communication systems beyond their designed capabilities. Supply networks had to support elaborate fictional armies while maintaining actual combat operations. Transportation systems had to move deception equipment and personnel without compromising genuine military movements or exposing the theatrical nature of Phantom formations. Advanced German analytical techniques posed constant challenges that required immediate adaptation of deception methods. Enemy intelligence developed mathematical models for evaluating military formations based on logistical footprints, equipment signatures, and communications patterns. Allied and Soviet specialists had to ensure their fictional armies satisfied all these analytical criteria while maintaining operational security about their actual military capabilities. The psychological impact on German command decision-making exceeded all projections as the full scope of deception operations became apparent through battlefield results. Wehrmacht commanders found themselves unable to distinguish between genuine and fabricated intelligence, creating strategic paralysis that benefited Allied and Soviet operations far beyond the immediate tactical advantages of successful deception programs. By mid-June 1944, both Operation Fortitude and Soviet Maskirovka had achieved something unprecedented in military history. They had fundamentally altered the strategic calculations of modern warfare through pure psychological manipulation of enemy decision-making processes. Phantom armies had proven more powerful than real divisions in determining the outcome of crucial battles, demonstrating that sometimes the most effective weapon was the one that existed only in the minds of those who feared it most. The ghost armies of World War II had accomplished what conventional weapons never could. By war's end, wooden tanks and canvas artillery had rewritten the fundamental mathematics of modern combat. The Soviets had shattered Army Group Center using nothing more than plywood and imagination to misdirect an entire Wehrmacht army group. The Americans had secured the beaches of Normandy, while Phantom divisions held German reserves frozen in place, defending against invasions that would never come. These weren't just clever tricks or elaborate pranks. They represented a profound understanding of human psychology applied to the deadliest game ever played. German intelligence officers, among the most skilled analysts in military history, had been systematically deceived by rubber tanks that cost $85 each. Entire panzer divisions had been positioned to counter threats that existed only in the minds of enemy commanders studying carefully orchestrated photographs. The numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. Every fake Soviet tank that convinced a German reconnaissance pilot meant fewer real panzers defending against Operation Bagration. Every inflatable Sherman that fooled Wehrmacht intelligence meant weaker opposition on the beaches of Normandy. The mathematics were simple and devastating. Phantom armies had achieved what millions of genuine soldiers could not, fundamentally altering enemy strategic thinking through pure theatrical performance. Perhaps most remarkably, these deceptions succeeded not by contradicting German expectations, but by confirming them perfectly. The Soviets gave Wehrmacht commanders exactly what they anticipated seeing near the Romanian oil fields. The Americans assembled precisely the invasion force that German doctrine predicted would strike at Calais. Both phantom armies told their enemies exactly what they wanted to hear, then disappeared like smoke, while real attacks materialized from completely unexpected directions. The legacy extends far beyond 1944. Modern military doctrine still studies these operations as masterpieces of strategic deception. The principles pioneered by Soviet maskirovka and American theatrical warfare continue influencing how nations approach the fundamental challenge of making enemies see what isn't there while hiding what is. Sometimes the most powerful weapon on any battlefield truly is the one that exists only in the imagination of those who fear it most.